Someone like you shouldn't even be allowed to touch that bag. The words sliced through the luxury boutique so sharply that every conversation inside instantly died. A few shoppers slowly turned around. One woman lowered her sunglasses. Another discreetly lifted her phone. Near the center display of designer handbags, Emily Harper froze in place, her cheeks turning red as her 8-year-old daughter tightened her small grip around her hand. Emily looked exhausted, the kind of exhausted that no amount of sleep could fix. Her blonde hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and the faded denim jacket hanging from her shoulders did little to hide how worn out she truly was. She hadn't planned on stepping into Sinclair luxury that afternoon. Women like her usually walked past stores like this without making eye contact. But Lily had spotted the sparkling birthday display through the glass windows while they were crossing downtown Chicago after Emily's second shift at the diner. "Mom, look," Lily had whispered with wide eyes. "It's beautiful." Emily should have kept walking. She knew better. But after everything her daughter had been through this year, after the funeral, after the bills, after the eviction notice sitting folded inside her purse, she couldn't bring herself to say no. Not on Lily's birthday. The warm air inside the boutique smelled faintly like expensive perfume and polished marble. Every shelf glowed beneath soft golden lighting. Emily immediately felt out of place the moment they walked in. She noticed the way a sales associate glanced at her sneakers before forcing a smile. She noticed another employee quietly whispering to someone near the register. And she definitely noticed the woman standing beside the premium handbag section, wearing a white designer coat worth more than Emily probably earned in 2 months. Victoria Sinclair. Tall, perfect makeup, diamond earrings that sparkled under the lights. The kind of woman who carried herself like the entire world belonged to her. Emily tried to avoid eye contact and gently guided Lily toward the clearance accessories near the back wall. But children didn't understand social rules adults created to separate people. Lily saw a small pink handbag displayed on a lower shelf and stepped closer, her eyes glowing with excitement. "Mom, look at this one," she whispered. Emily smiled softly for the first time all day. "That is pretty." But before she could pull Lily back, the little girl accidentally brushed against a larger designer bag sitting beside it. The expensive purse tipped sideways and fell onto the carpeted floor. The sound itself wasn't loud, but the reaction was. "Oh my God!" Victoria snapped as if someone had shattered glass. Every head turned. Lily immediately stepped backward, frightened. Emily quickly bent down and picked up the bag carefully. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "My daughter didn't mean. Do you even know how much that costs?" Victoria interrupted loudly. Her voice echoed across the boutique. Lily looked down at her shoes. Emily's stomach tightened. "It was an accident," Emily replied calmly, trying to defuse the situation. But Victoria stepped closer, staring at Emily like she was something dirty dragged in from the street. "This is exactly why stores like this need standards," she said. "People come in here pretending they belong, touching things they could never afford." A few uncomfortable whispers spread through the crowd. One man awkwardly looked away. Someone near the entrance started recording more openly now. Emily could feel every pair of eyes on her. She swallowed hard and pulled Lily gently behind her leg. "We'll leave," Emily said softly. But Victoria wasn't finished. Not even close. Victoria folded her arms slowly, almost enjoying the silence spreading through the boutique. "No," she said coldly. "I do not think you understand how this works." Emily kept one protective hand on Lily's shoulder as several shoppers continued staring. She could already feel Lily trembling beside her. "Ma'am, we said we are sorry," Emily replied carefully. "It was an accident. The bag did not even get damaged." Victoria let out a short laugh that sounded more insulting than amused. "That is not the point," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "People like you walk into places like this and think apologies magically fix everything." Emily noticed one of the sales associates quickly approaching from the front counter. The young woman looked nervous, glancing back and forth between Victoria and Emily as if she already knew who she was expected to support. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Sinclair?" the employee asked gently. Victoria immediately pointed toward Emily. "Yes, there is a problem. This woman and her child were handling merchandise they clearly cannot afford." The employee's expression shifted instantly after hearing the Sinclair name. Emily saw the exact moment professionalism disappeared and fear replaced it. "I understand," the employee said quietly. Lily tugged on Emily's sleeve. Mom, can we go? She whispered. Emily's chest tightened, hearing the fear in her daughter's voice. This was supposed to be one good day. One small moment away from overdue bills and second jobs and empty promises that life would eventually get easier. She had spent the entire morning serving coffee to office workers who barely looked at her face. Then she rushed across town to clean hotel rooms for another 6 hours. Her feet still ached from standing all day, and she had exactly $43 left in her checking account until Friday. But none of that mattered to Lily. Her daughter still smiled when she saw birthday balloons. She still believed her mother could fix everything. And Emily was trying so hard not to let that belief die. We are leaving, Emily repeated calmly. She turned slightly toward the exit, hoping the nightmare would end if she simply walked away. But Victoria stepped sideways, blocking her path with deliberate confidence. Not so fast, she said. You touched a limited edition bag worth nearly $12,000. Several people gasped softly. Emily blinked in disbelief. 12,000? She repeated quietly. Victoria nodded with satisfaction. And now it needs inspection because your daughter dropped it. Lily's eyes widened immediately. I am sorry, she whispered, her voice shaking. I did not mean to. Victoria barely acknowledged her. That is what careless people always say. Emily felt anger flare inside her chest for the first time. Not because of the insults aimed at her, but because of the way this woman was looking at Lily. Like her child was something embarrassing standing in the middle of the store. Please stop speaking to my daughter like that, Emily said firmly. The tension inside the boutique shifted instantly. Victoria's expression hardened. Excuse me. Emily took a slow breath. She is 8 years old. She made a mistake. Victoria leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound more threatening. Then maybe you should teach her not to touch things that belong to successful people. The cruelty in the sentence stunned even some of the customers nearby. One older woman frowned uncomfortably. A man near the watches section quietly muttered, "This is getting ridiculous." But nobody stepped in. Nobody ever did. Emily suddenly became aware of how trapped she felt standing there beneath the bright lights, while strangers watched her struggle to hold herself together. Then, from across the boutique near the back seating area, an older man slowly looked up from his coffee for the very first time. The older man sat alone near the back lounge area beside a tall indoor fountain, dressed so simply that nobody in the boutique paid him any attention. Gray sweater, dark jeans, reading glasses resting low on his nose. He looked more like a retired college professor than someone who belonged inside one of the most expensive fashion stores in downtown Chicago. Yet while everyone else stared at Emily and Victoria, he quietly watched every detail unfolding in front of him. Emily did not notice him at all. Right now, all she could think about was getting Lily out of the store before her daughter completely broke down in tears. Please, Emily said softly, trying one last time to end the situation peacefully. We never meant to cause trouble. Victoria tilted her head slightly, almost amused by Emily's calmness. That is funny, she replied, because trouble seems to follow people who refuse to stay in their place. Lily pressed closer against her mother's side. Mom, she whispered nervously, did I do something bad? Emily immediately knelt beside her daughter despite the dozens of eyes watching them. No, sweetheart, she said. Gently. You did not do anything bad. But Victoria let out another cold laugh. Actually, she did. Children learn behavior from their parents. The words hit Emily harder than she expected. For a second, memories flashed through her mind so quickly they almost stole her breath away. The hospital hallway. The folded American flag handed to her 6 months ago. The military officer standing silently at her apartment door. Her husband Jason had spent 11 years serving his country, only for Emily to lose everything in a single afternoon phone call. Since then, every day had become survival. Every grocery trip involved checking prices twice. Every electric bill felt like a countdown. Every smile for Lily required effort Emily no longer had left inside her. And now this woman stood here, humiliating her child over a handbag. Emily slowly stood back up, her expression no longer embarrassed but exhausted. You do not know anything about us, she said quietly. Victoria crossed her arms. I know enough. The sales associate beside them shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Sinclair, she began carefully. Perhaps we should just inspect the bag and move forward. Victoria turned sharply toward her. Are you questioning me? No, ma'am. Good. Victoria then looked back at Emily with renewed confidence, fully aware the staff would support her no matter how unreasonable she sounded. I think security should document this, she announced. Almost immediately, a tall security guard near the entrance began walking toward them. Lily's breathing grew shaky. Mom, are we in trouble? Emily forced herself to smile despite the humiliation burning through her chest. No, baby. Everything is okay. But it clearly was not okay. People had stopped shopping entirely now. Some openly recorded with their phones while whispering to each other. Emily overheard phrases like, "That poor woman," and "This is insane." Yet nobody stepped forward. Nobody wanted to challenge someone carrying the Sinclair name. The security guard arrived and spoke politely but cautiously. Is there an issue here? Victoria answered before Emily could speak. This woman damaged merchandise and is attempting to leave. Emily stared at her in disbelief. That is not true. Then you will not mind waiting while we verify it, Victoria replied smoothly. The guard looked uncertain. He glanced briefly at the handbag, which still appeared perfectly untouched. But before he could answer, the older man near the fountain quietly closed his book and stood up for the first time. He did not raise his voice. He did not rush. Yet something about the calm expression on his face suddenly made the atmosphere inside the boutique feel different. He took a few slow steps forward, watching Victoria carefully, and then asked a simple question that immediately silenced the room. Has anyone here actually checked the security cameras yet? For the first time since the confrontation began, Victoria Sinclair looked slightly caught off guard. The older man's voice was calm, almost casual, but it carried a kind of quiet authority that immediately changed the energy inside the boutique. Even the security guard hesitated before responding. Victoria recovered quickly and folded her arms tighter. There is no need to review cameras, she said sharply. The child knocked over the bag. Everyone saw it. The older man nodded once. Yes, he replied evenly. I saw that part too. He continued walking slowly toward the center of the store until he stood only a few feet away from Emily and Lily. Up close, Emily noticed his tired but kind eyes. He looked to be somewhere in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. There was nothing flashy about him at all. No luxury watch. No expensive suit. Just calm confidence. Lily peeked nervously from behind her mother's arm while the man glanced down at her gently. Accidents happen, he said softly. Lily gave a tiny nod, but stayed silent. Victoria clearly did not appreciate the interruption. Sir, with all due respect, this situation does not concern you. The older man looked back at her. Public humiliation concerns everyone. A few customers exchanged glances after hearing that. Emily could feel the tension shifting slightly now. Not enough to help her, but enough to make Victoria less comfortable controlling the room. The sales associate standing nearby quietly lowered her eyes, almost ashamed. Victoria stepped closer to the older man. I think you misunderstand who you are speaking to. No, he answered calmly. I do not think I do. The security guard cleared his throat awkwardly. Maybe we should all calm down. I am perfectly calm, Victoria replied instantly. Then she pointed directly at Emily again. But I refuse to allow people to disrespect this store. Emily felt exhaustion washing over her all over again. She wanted to leave so badly. Every second inside the boutique felt heavier than the last. Lily looked pale now, overwhelmed by the attention and whispers surrounding them. Emily knelt slightly beside her daughter again. Hey, she whispered gently, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. Look at me. Everything is going to be okay. Lily tried to be brave. I did not mean to ruin your birthday, Mom. The sentence nearly broke Emily's heart right there in the middle of the store. You did not ruin anything, Emily said immediately. None of this is your fault. Several people nearby visibly softened hearing that exchange. One woman quietly lowered her phone, looking uncomfortable for continuing to record. But Victoria seemed almost irritated by the sympathy Emily was receiving. This emotional performance does not change facts, she said coldly. Luxury items cost money. Responsibility matters. The older man looked directly at the handbag still resting on the display table. Interesting, he murmured. Because from where I am standing, the bag appears perfectly fine. Victoria's jaw tightened. That is not your decision to make. Maybe not, he replied. But accusing a child publicly before verifying damage seems reckless. For the first time, several people in the crowd openly nodded in agreement. Victoria noticed it immediately. Her perfect composure cracked for half a second before she turned toward the store manager near the front counter. "Mark," she called firmly. "Why is this still continuing?" A tall man in a dark tailored suit hurried over, clearly nervous. "Mrs. Sinclair," he said carefully. "Perhaps we can resolve this privately." "No," Victoria snapped. "I want documentation. I want her information. And I want that child taught not to touch things she cannot afford." The entire boutique fell silent again. Emily stared at her in disbelief while Lily looked down at the floor, humiliated. But the older man no longer looked calm now. His expression changed very slightly, not with anger, but disappointment, the kind that carried far more weight. He slowly turned toward the manager and asked, "Is this truly how Sinclair Luxury trains its employees to treat customers?" The moment he said the company name, the manager's face changed instantly. Manager Mark Reynolds blinked twice as if he suddenly recognized something everyone else in the store had missed. His confident corporate smile disappeared almost instantly. "Sir," he said carefully, "I did not realize you were here today." Victoria looked confused for the first time since the confrontation began. "You know him?" she asked sharply. Mark hesitated. The older man answered before he could. "That is not important right now." His calm tone somehow made the silence around them even heavier. Emily noticed several employees exchanging nervous looks near the registers. Whatever was happening, it clearly mattered to them. Victoria, however, still seemed unwilling to lose control of the situation. "Well, since you seem so invested," she said coldly, "perhaps you would like to explain why customers should be allowed to damage merchandise without consequences." The older man glanced briefly at the handbag again. "You continue using the word damage," he replied. "Yet nobody has confirmed there is any damage at all." Mark quickly stepped toward the display table and carefully inspected the bag himself. The boutique became so quiet Emily could hear the soft fountain water trickling from the back lounge area. After several tense seconds, Mark swallowed awkwardly. "There does not appear to be any visible damage," he admitted quietly. A few people in the crowd immediately began whispering louder. Victoria's face darkened. "That is not the point." "Actually," the older man said gently, "that was entirely your point 5 minutes ago." Emily lowered her eyes, trying to stay composed, but inside she felt something shifting. Not relief exactly, more like confusion. She still did not understand why this stranger was helping them. People rarely stepped in for women like her, especially not in places like this. Lily tugged softly on Emily's jacket. "Mom," she whispered, "can we please go home now?" Emily brushed her daughter's hair back gently. "Soon, sweetheart." Victoria suddenly looked toward Mark with visible irritation. "Are you seriously choosing this woman over me?" The question immediately made the employees tense again. Emily could tell they all knew exactly who Victoria Sinclair was. And more importantly, they feared her. Mark carefully adjusted his tie. "Mrs. Sinclair, perhaps it would be best if we de-escalate this situation." "Do not tell me to de-escalate," Victoria snapped. "This entire store is filled with people recording while this woman stands here pretending to be the victim." Emily stared at her in disbelief. "Pretending," she repeated softly. Victoria looked directly at her. "You walked into a luxury boutique dressed like you were shopping at a gas station convenience store and expected everyone to treat you like you belong here." Several customers visibly cringed hearing the comment. One younger employee near the entrance quietly muttered, "That is awful." Emily felt humiliation burning through her chest again. She looked down at her faded jeans and worn sneakers. Suddenly, she became painfully aware of every stain on her jacket from working double shifts, every sign of exhaustion on her face. She hated that this woman had the power to make her feel small so quickly. But before Emily could respond, the older man spoke again. "Interesting," he said calmly. "Because I was under the impression Sinclair Luxury welcomed all customers." Victoria let out a sarcastic laugh. "You clearly do not understand branding." The older man studied her quietly for a moment. "No," he replied softly. "I understand branding very well." Something about the way he said it caused Mark's face to lose even more color. The security guard straightened awkwardly. Several employees stopped pretending to work and openly watched now. Then the older man slowly reached into the pocket of his plain gray sweater and removed a small silver keycard. He handed it silently to Mark. The moment Mark saw it, his entire expression changed. He stood up straighter immediately. "Sir," he said under his breath, almost stunned. Victoria frowned impatiently. What is going on? Mark looked at her nervously, then back at the older man, clearly unsure what to say. Finally, the older man turned toward Victoria and asked one simple question. Has your husband ever mentioned Richard Sinclair to you? The color drained from Victoria Sinclair's face so quickly it almost looked unreal. For the first time since she began humiliating Emily, she had no immediate response. The boutique remained completely silent as the older man stood calmly in front of her, waiting. Even the customers holding up their phones seemed frozen now. Finally, Victoria forced a stiff smile. Of course I know Richard Sinclair, she replied carefully. He is my husband's grandfather. The older man nodded once. That is correct. Emily looked back and forth between them, still trying to understand what was happening. Lily held tightly onto her mother's hand, sensing the sudden change in the room even if she did not fully understand it. Mark Reynolds looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Sir, he said quietly, I truly did not know you planned to visit this location today. Richard Sinclair glanced around the boutique slowly. That appears to be the least concerning issue at the moment. Victoria straightened her posture, clearly trying to regain control. Richard, she began, softening her voice instantly. This entire situation has been misunderstood. Emily almost could not believe how quickly the woman's attitude had changed. Just moments ago, Victoria had spoken to her like she was worthless. Now suddenly her tone sounded nervous and polite. Richard looked directly at her. Misunderstood, he repeated calmly. I watched you publicly shame a mother and her child for nearly 20 minutes. Victoria laughed awkwardly. I was protecting the brand. No, Richard replied quietly. You were protecting your ego. The words landed heavily across the boutique. Several employees lowered their eyes. Immediately, Victoria's expression tightened. You are making this far more dramatic than it needs to be. Richard slowly turned toward Emily and Lily. A little girl is standing here terrified because grown adults decided embarrassment was more important than kindness. Lily looked down at the floor again, clearly overwhelmed by all the attention. Richard's expression softened slightly as he noticed her trembling hands. What is your name? He asked gently. Lily, she answered quietly. Well, Lily, Richard said, you did nothing wrong. Emily felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. It was such a simple sentence, but after everything that had happened inside the boutique, hearing someone finally say it out loud nearly broke her composure. Victoria noticed the emotional shift and immediately tried redirecting the conversation. Richard, surely you understand businesses have standards. Yes, he answered calmly. And one of mine has always been dignity. Mark nervously cleared his throat. Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately. Richard looked at him. Why? It became public the moment your staff allowed this behavior to continue. Nobody argued with him. Emily noticed that even the security guard now seemed deeply uncomfortable standing beside Victoria. One of the younger employees quietly walked toward the register and returned holding a small bottle of water. She handed it gently to Lily. Happy birthday, she whispered softly. Emily blinked in surprise. How did you know it was her birthday? The employee looked embarrassed. I overheard earlier. Lily accepted the water with a tiny smile for the first time since entering the store. Victoria looked increasingly frustrated watching sympathy shift away from her. This entire scene is becoming ridiculous, she snapped. All of this over one misunderstanding. Richard's eyes moved toward her slowly. No, he said. This is happening because somewhere along the way, people in this company started confusing wealth with superiority. The sentence hit the room harder than anyone expected. Emily noticed several customers quietly nodding. Victoria folded her arms defensively. I think Daniel would disagree with how you are handling this. Richard's expression remained calm. Then perhaps we should ask him. Victoria frowned slightly. What do you mean? Richard reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out his phone. He glanced at the screen briefly before looking back at her. Because your husband has already been watching the store cameras for the last 10 minutes. Victoria stared at Richard Sinclair as if hoping he was bluffing. Daniel is watching? She asked carefully. Richard nodded once. Along with the legal department. The silence inside the boutique became unbearable. Mark Reynolds looked like he could barely breathe. The security guard slowly stepped farther away from Victoria without even realizing he was doing it. Emily stood frozen beside Lily, still overwhelmed by how quickly the entire situation had turned upside down. Just 20 minutes earlier, she had been struggling not to cry in front of strangers. Now the most powerful people connected to the company were involved. Victoria forced another laugh, but this one sounded strained. "This is completely unnecessary," she said. "You are embarrassing me over a minor misunderstanding." Richard's expression never changed. "No, Victoria. You embarrassed yourself." Several customers exchanged looks after hearing that. The people recording on their phones no longer looked entertained. Now they looked fascinated. One woman whispered, "This is unbelievable." Victoria glanced around the room and finally seemed to realize the crowd was no longer on her side. "I was trying to protect the reputation of the brand," she insisted. "By humiliating a child?" Richard asked calmly. Victoria opened her mouth, but could not answer immediately. Emily looked down at Lily, who was clutching the bottle of water with both hands. Her daughter still looked nervous, but at least she was no longer fighting tears. Richard turned toward Emily gently. "Miss, I would like to apologize personally for what happened here today." Emily blinked in surprise. "You do not owe me an apology." "Actually," Richard replied, "I do. A company reflects the values it tolerates." The sentence hit Mark especially hard. He lowered his head slightly. Emily could tell he knew exactly what Richard meant. Then Richard looked back toward the employees gathered near the registers. "How many of you witnessed this situation from the beginning?" Nearly every hand slowly raised. "And how many of you felt uncomfortable with how this mother and child were treated?" This time the hesitation was longer, but eventually several employees raised their hands again. Victoria looked horrified. "You cannot be serious." Richard ignored her completely. "Fear in a workplace creates silence," he said calmly. "Silence creates cruelty." Nobody spoke. Even the customers had gone completely quiet now. Emily suddenly noticed how different Richard sounded from every wealthy person she had ever encountered. There was no arrogance in his voice. No need to dominate people. He simply spoke like someone used to being heard. Victoria folded her arms tightly. "I think everyone is overreacting." Richard slowly looked at her. "A little girl spent her birthday apologizing for existing in your presence." Victoria's expression hardened again. "That is dramatic." Before Richard could answer, a phone began vibrating loudly against the marble counter near the register. Mark glanced down and immediately stiffened. "It is Daniel," he said nervously. Victoria reached for the phone instantly. "Give it to me." But Mark hesitated and looked at Richard first. Richard nodded once. Mark answered the call carefully and placed it on speaker. Daniel Sinclair's voice filled the boutique almost immediately. Calm, controlled, furious beneath the surface. "Victoria," he said quietly, "tell me I did not just watch you publicly shame a widow and her daughter inside my family's store." Victoria swallowed hard. "Daniel, this is being exaggerated." "I watched the footage myself," he replied. "You accused an 8-year-old child of damaging merchandise that was never damaged." Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed loudly. Daniel continued. "Do you know what concerns me most?" Victoria said nothing. Not the cameras. Not the customers recording. Not even the public embarrassment. "What concerns me most is that my grandfather had to remind people inside this company to treat human beings with decency." Emily felt chills run through her arms hearing the disappointment in his voice. Then Daniel said something that completely changed the atmosphere again. "And there is something else you should know, Victoria." I recognized the name Emily Harper. Emily's heart skipped unexpectedly when Daniel Sinclair said her name. She tightened her hold on Lily's hand, confused and suddenly nervous all over again. Victoria looked equally stunned. "You know her?" she asked sharply. The line remained silent for one brief moment before Daniel answered. Her husband was Sergeant Jason Harper. Emily felt the air leave her lungs. Nobody had mentioned Jason's name in public since the funeral. Even hearing it out loud still hurt. Richard slowly turned toward her with visible surprise in his eyes. Daniel continued speaking through the phone. 3 years ago, my foundation partnered with a veteran support program in Illinois. Jason Harper volunteered during one of our outreach events. Emily blinked rapidly, memories rushing back all at once. Jason coming home smiling after helping organize a charity fundraiser in Chicago. Him joking that rich businessmen looked terrified every time veterans spoke honestly. She had almost forgotten about that night completely. "I met him twice," Daniel said quietly. "He spoke about his wife and daughter constantly." Lily looked up at Emily. "Dad talked about us." Emily swallowed hard and nodded softly. "Every chance he got." The boutique had become completely silent again, but this silence felt different now. Heavier. Human. Even the customers recording seemed uncomfortable holding their phones anymore. Daniel's voice lowered slightly. Your husband was a good man, Emily. Emily looked down, trying desperately not to cry in front of strangers again. She had spent months teaching herself how to survive without falling apart in public. But hearing someone remember Jason with respect after so long hit a part of her heart she had been trying to protect. Victoria crossed her arms defensively. I still do not understand what this has to do with anything. Richard closed his eyes briefly, almost disappointed she still did not understand. Daniel answered her calmly. It has everything to do with this. Nobody interrupted him. A woman who lost her husband serving this country walked into one of our stores with her child, and instead of kindness, she was humiliated in front of strangers because she did not look wealthy enough. Victoria immediately tried defending herself again. I did not know who she was. Daniel's response came instantly. That is exactly the problem. The words landed harder than shouting ever could have. Emily noticed one employee quietly wiping tears from her eyes near the jewelry counter. Mark Reynolds looked physically sick with regret now. Richard stepped closer to Emily gently. Why did you come into the store today? Emily hesitated at first, embarrassed by the truth. But something about Richard's voice made lying feel unnecessary. Lily saw the birthday display outside. She admitted softly. I just wanted her to have one happy afternoon. Lily looked down shyly. Richard's expression softened immediately. Today is your birthday? Lily nodded once. I turned 8. Richard smiled faintly. 8 is important. Victoria looked increasingly isolated standing in the middle of the boutique, while sympathy continued shifting further away from her. For the first time all day, nobody seemed impressed by her designer clothes or expensive jewelry anymore. Daniel spoke again through the phone. Mark. Yes, sir. Effective immediately, I want a full review of employee conduct at this location. Mark straightened instantly. Yes, sir. And Victoria, Daniel continued calmly. You will no longer represent Sinclair Luxury publicly until further notice. Victoria's face turned pale. Daniel, you cannot be serious. I am very serious. She looked around desperately, as though searching for support that no longer existed. But nobody stepped in this time. Not the employees. Not the customers. Not even Mark. Richard slowly placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. Young lady, he said kindly, I think your birthday deserves a much better ending than this. For the first time since entering the boutique, Lily smiled without fear. Nearly an hour later, the atmosphere inside Sinclair Luxury looked completely different from the moment Emily and Lily first walked through the doors. The tension, whispers, and humiliation had slowly been replaced by something quieter and far more genuine. Employees who once stood frozen in fear were now carefully resetting displays while softly checking on Emily and Lily every few minutes. Someone had brought Lily a slice of birthday cake from the cafe across the street. Another employee found a small silver birthday candle and placed it carefully on top while the staff gathered near the lounge area. Lily sat beside Richard Sinclair smiling shyly, her earlier fear finally fading away. Emily watched her daughter laugh softly for the first time all day and felt a knot in her chest slowly loosen. For months, she had lived in survival mode, constantly bracing herself for the next bill, the next bad phone call, the next reminder that Jason was never coming home. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped expecting kindness from strangers altogether. Yet somehow, in the middle of the worst public embarrassment she had experienced in years, kindness had finally found her again. Richard sat comfortably beside Lily as if they had known each other forever. You know, he said with a faint smile, your father once argued with me for 20 minutes because he believed military families deserved better healthcare support. Emily blinked in surprise. That sounds exactly like Jason. Richard chuckled softly. He was stubborn. Very stubborn, Emily agreed. For the first time since entering the boutique, she smiled without forcing it. Richard's expression softened. He talked about his daughter constantly, said she was smarter than he was. Lily grinned proudly. I am good at math. Then your father was probably right, Richard replied warmly. Nearby, Mark Reynolds approached, carefully carrying several shopping bags. He looked nervous but sincere. Miss Harper, he said quietly, on behalf of this store and everyone who failed you today, I am deeply sorry. Emily immediately shook her head. You do not owe me anything. Actually, Mark replied honestly, I think we do. He gently placed the bags beside her chair. Emily frowned slightly. What is this? A birthday gift for Lily, he explained. Emily's eyes widened instantly. Oh no, we cannot accept that. But Richard smiled gently. Please do. Emily looked inside one of the bags and immediately saw the small pink handbag Lily had admired earlier near the display wall. The exact one her daughter had quietly stared at before everything went wrong. Lily gasped softly. Mom. Emily's throat tightened all over again. Richard, this is too much. No, he replied calmly. Too much was allowing a child to feel ashamed for existing in the wrong outfit. Emily looked down, unable to speak for a moment. Across the boutique, Victoria quietly exited through a side hallway without saying another word to anyone. Nobody stopped her. Nobody even looked at her anymore. The power she walked in with had disappeared completely the moment people stopped confusing wealth with character. Richard noticed Emily watching the hallway. Money reveals people, he said quietly. It does not improve them. Emily nodded slowly. Outside the large front windows, evening lights now glowed across downtown Chicago, while light snow began drifting softly onto the sidewalks. Lily held her new birthday bag carefully in her lap, like it was the most valuable thing in the world. But Emily knew the real gift was not inside those shopping bags at all. It was the reminder that dignity still mattered, that kindness still existed, and that even after the hardest seasons of life, good people could still appear when you least expected them. As they prepared to leave, Lily suddenly looked up at Richard. Do you think my dad saw all this from heaven? The entire room fell silent for one gentle moment. Richard smiled warmly and squeezed her hand softly. I think, he said, your father would be very proud of both of you tonight.